if I understand it well, it is that both the US and the EU promote democracy a little bit differently. But I wanted to ask you whether it's not only a different way of promoting it, but also different understanding of democracy, what democracy is by both of the superpowers. So in other words, whether it is that the US and the EU assist actually a little bit different things, and whether there are any consequences of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something I have been studying, and it's both. There's different approaches and there's a different understanding of democracy, right? So while both the US and the EU operate within the general context of liberal democracy, right, that I was, as I defined it, right, the EU is more sort of on the social side, right, meaning social democracy, more of this, bigger government, right? More sort of communitarian understanding of democracy as not just something that should liberate the individual from the oppression of the state, but that the state has some role in the development of the individual, right? It's like in Europe, we're sort of used to the welfare states, we're used to the assistance from the government to some extent, right? Universal healthcare, et cetera, right? And the Europeans tend to see this as part of democracy, right? As a service that democracy should be providing to the people in order for democracy to work, right? That there has to be some kind of an equality of opportunity, but an equality of of results in order for democracy to work well, right? So this kind of understanding on the part of the Europeans leads to a different approach to promoting democracy. Cooperating more with the governments, right? Supporting even budget-wise governments, right? Supporting different types of reforms and provisions. For example, in the early 1990s, right, when Eastern European countries were considering whether the socialist constitutions they had need amending or whether they need completely new constitutions, right? So it's the American experts who are coming in and saying, if you are going to draft new constitutions, you should not include any positive rights in those constitutions. And by positive rights, it is meant that, for example, the government says all persons have the right to a dignified work, right? To all persons have a right to a dignified living space, etc., etc. Where the government makes positive claims in terms of providing these provisions to the people, right? And the Americans said, you should only be including the negative rights of the people in terms of, that the government should not intervene into their religious practices, etc., right? But that the government should not mandate itself to provide housing, for example, or employment to the people, right? Because that's socialism, right? And whenever the government does that, the government becomes bigger. And the bigger the government is, the less freedom for people. And the less freedom, the less democracy, right? But if you look into European constitutions, there's lots of these positive rights there. Even the European Union, right? We had just recently the Social Charter of the European Union published by the Commission, which has many of these sort of components of the positive rights, where the European Union is saying every European citizen should have a dignified employment. Every European citizen should have support during unemployment, etc., right? So it's a different understanding of what democracy is and different understanding of how democracy then should come about, right? Where again, a general sort of understanding of why the revolutions in 89, 90 sort of took place is Europeans considered, well, it was the political elites, it was the communists who became weak, the reformist communists came in, and the system started to topple, right? So it was a top-down revolutions, right? Whilst the American interpretation was different, right? It's the political movements from the bottom up that caused the transformations of these regimes, like the Solidarity movement, like Václav Havel, the individual dissidents in these countries. The pressure was cooking at the bottom, and in the end, it was the top, the political elites, that had to succumb to the pressure from the bottom, right? So this also somehow, these understandings shaped the way that the US and the EU approach democracy assistance, where the Americans are much more focused on supporting civil society, supporting individual political parties, right? So as I was saying, you know, relating to the Arab Spring, for example, the NED was also barred from operating in Egypt, right? But it shifted its operations into other countries, and Czech Republic being among one of them, right? And it was actually paying Egyptian political activists and opposition party activists to come to Prague for like a 3-week workshop on how to organize their parties, right? How to get out the vote, right? How to raise their attractiveness and legitimacy among the Egyptian people, right? So really working with the political parties, working with the civil society, working with small businesses, right? And helping them to understand how they should lobby their government, for example, etc. So the approach, the American approach is, you know, by default more oriented towards the bottom sort of the society, right? The civil society which can become frustrated and then, you know, top the pressure cooker and topple the government. The European approach is much more top down, really working with the governments, right? The governments that want to work with them, right? Giving them incentives to make reforms, and that is seen as the recipe towards, you know, building and consolidating democracy, right? So if we put it together, you know, the United States is the one that helps to sort of mobilize the public, right, to raise against their authoritarian and oppressive regimes. And then it's the European Union, which is good at helping to build and consolidate institutions, because it has the track record of also helping Eastern European countries, right, somehow, you know, adopt their, you know, post-transformation or post-revolutionary institutions into the liberal democratic system, right? So I believe that this difference in approach actually comes from a different understanding of both democracy and how democracy comes about.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And let's call the day today. Thank you very much, first of all, to Jan for his enlightening remarks and for addressing all the questions. We at Institute of American Studies and TAS hope to host you soon in more regular circumstances, although I have to say that when I recently say regular by meaning mitigate person, it just sounds weird in itself. So let's just hope it won't last for too long. And thank you very much for our audience as well for the participation. If you enjoyed the meeting today, please follow the Transatlantic Studies program social media, as we have another discussions like this planned. I think I can tell that next Transatlantic Encounter meeting will be held on April 28th. And another one we have tentatively scheduled for the first week of June, so they will be both announced in a due time, and we hope you will be able to participate in all of them. And as for now, thanks again very much for coming to everyone. And Jan, it was a great pleasure to host you. Thanks very much. All the best. And
pleasure on my side.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.